So welcome everybody to the Jacob Edwards Library. We're delighted to see such a large audience here this evening, and I'm glad that some of you have had a chance to catch up in advance of our presentation this evening. We're delighted to welcome Anthony Pioppi here this evening, who is a golf writer, historian and archaeologist. He's the author of 4 books in addition to The Finest Nines, To the Nines, the history of the Minikahda Golf Club in 2013, and Haunted Golf with colleague Chris Gonsalves in 2009. Pioppi is a contributing editor for Superintendent magazine. He has written for such publications as USGA, Golf Course, Architecture and Golf Punk. And this, of course, is going to date some of you in the audience. Mr. Pioppi is a 1981 graduate of Salisbury High. So I see lots of supporters and friends in the audience as well. So I'm delighted to welcome you here this evening. I hope you enjoy the program. We will follow the presentation this evening by a book signing. 3 of the titles are available and they're on the table here. The most recent is The Finest Nines, and To the Nines, and Haunted Golf. So the 3 titles will be available for purchasing if you're interested, and I'm sure you'll do the honours by signing if anybody would wish.
If they pay for the book, I'll sign it. Okay.
There is a charge, and that's something that you will talk to Mr. Pioppi about. So without further ado, I think we're getting ready to get underway, and thank you again for coming this evening. And I'm delighted that we are welcoming you on the year that is the 100th anniversary of the local golf club, which is the Cohasset Golf Club, which is here in town in Southbridge. So I'm sure you'll be referring to that in the talk. Thank you very much.
So the first thing I want to start with is my parents aren't here at my request. Some people ask me if they're here. I couldn't handle that pressure. Having classmates sitting in this front row and teachers is enough to make it stressful as it is. Margaret gave me a lot of suggestions on what I should talk about today and what I did to get to become a book author and write about golf and all of that. So I think I want to touch base on that a little bit. I think, and I have some teachers here, people who were my teachers in high school. I think they would agree. My parents would agree, which is one reason I wanted here. But I was a chronic underachiever in school. I had one report card that had an A, B, C, D, and F on it. And so that kind of confused my parents as how I could be that kind of person. I think I liked the classes where there was no right answers and I had to think, such as writing and history and music and the like, and then math and science really didn't appeal to me, and the ones I liked were A's and the ones I didn't like, the math and the language classes, were F's. And going through school, I think I had an idea, if I remember correctly, that I wanted to be somehow involved in newspapers. And I'm not sure why, but I think there's a direct correlation to the fact that my father's drugstore or pharmacy was next door to the Southbridge News. And I can remember watching the press run and watching a giant roll of white paper turn into a newspaper at the other end. And I thought that was fascinating. In those days, that was the cutting edge of news. I knew what the news was before virtually anybody else when I was at my dad's store, and the newspaper was coming out the other end. And I knew the reporters because they ate at my dad's store, and I knew Lauren Giglione, who was the editor and the owner of the press, who was extremely well regarded nationwide for what he had done with the Southbridge News, and he had written a book about newspapers in New England. And I think I kind of, along the lines, became enamored with that. My parents read a lot. We had the Telegram, we had the Gazette and the Southbridge News every day in our house, and I remember them reading it, and I read it, and my brother read it. I'm not here. And I kind of had this idea that I thought I wanted to write. And I wasn't really in love with the school newspaper, which I don't know if they're still one, but it was called The Omnivore. And as far as I know, I think this is why I say the only piece I ever wrote was my senior year, and it was a double album review. AC/DC's Back in Black and Black Sabbath's Never Say Die. And the review was that they were both debuting new lead singers, and that's what I wrote about. And when I wrote it, there was a woman living next door to me who was a staff writer for the Southbridge News, who went on to be a very prominent writer for the Providence newspaper, that liked it and told me that I did a good job, and I thought that made me feel really good. And then my senior year in high school, a teacher by the name of Sally Burns decided to start a journalism class. And it was kind of, we did it as, she had an idea what she wanted to do, create this newspaper. We named it The Fly. There was the kids in the class named it The Fly, as in the fly on the wall. I'm actually missing the second page. It was 2 8.5 by 11s. And we talked about volleyball preliminaries and pie eating contest, and the Navy band was there. And I wish I had the other page, because I would tell you, were you in the class? And you are in the class. And we rotated each issue, who the editor was and who the sports editor was, and who laid it out. And the first issue I was the editor, and I got to write the editorial. And if you remember at the time, there was something called Proposition 2.5, which was cutting back, I remember, state funds to things like sports and all that. And I wrote an anti-Proposition 2.5 editorial. It was about 28 words, and it came out after the state vote, I believe the state passed it, and Southbridge passed it. And for some reason, a school board member by the name of Ray Burnham decided to bring my editorial up in the school. And he criticized me for writing in his publication something that went against what the voters had voted, and was funded by the town, and he didn't think that I had any right to do that. And it made the South paper, and it made the Wish to Tell the Girl. And I remember walking into school and Peter Hopgood laughing at me and saying, "You are in so much trouble." And I said, "Why?"
I get in a lot of trouble with him too.
Yeah, and he said, "Go to the library." And Mrs. Greb had the 2 newspapers out, and she handed them to me, and I realized, holy crap, I can get in trouble for writing the truth. And that really made me like writing right at that point. And in the next day's paper, the Southbridge News defended me in a really well-written, terse editorial that this was the basic First Amendment right and freedom of speech. And it created a real storm for a while. And I think Ray Burnham ate lunch in my dad's store. My dad said to him, what were you thinking? And I said, I don't know. And about 2 days later, I got a call from George Geer, who was the editor of the Southbridge News. And he called my parents at home, and I answered. He said, "Tony?" And I said, "Yes." "It's George Geer from Southbridge News. Staying out of trouble?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That's really too bad. Do you want to write for us?" And I said, "Yeah." And he invited me down. And his idea was for me to write the cover issue of the graduation, the cover story of the graduation issue, my senior year. And we came up with a story where I would profile 4 people in my class who were going in 4 different directions. Dave O'Brien was going to a 2-year school. Deb Beauregard was going straight to work. Ricky Kudamarsh was going to Boston College on an academic and athletic scholarship. And Kurt Goldman was going in the military. And I got paid for this. And I got paid real money, and I got paid money that even now, just newspapers are so awful. I actually get paid a serious amount of money to do it. And that was it. And that was how I got into writing. And I went to college, and this college newspaper wasn't very good. And then my senior year, we came up with an underground newspaper, and I was at a Catholic school. And we put out 4 issues of an underground newspaper. And I knew we were on the right track after it was 11 by 17, both sides. After the first issue came out, we received anonymous donations for the next issue that turned out to be from administration and staff, because we were touching on topics that the school newspaper wasn't allowed to. We wrote the first ever piece about the fact that there were homosexuals on campus at a Catholic college. Our second issue was we ran 2 photos. We ran a photo of the men's basketball locker room and the women's basketball locker room, and how one was really good and how one was really crappy. And we know which it was. And at the time, the men were 17-7 and the women were 19-6. And we just wrote something like "fair" across the top, and that was it. And again, we got in trouble, and we created this storm for just kind of writing the truth. And I was like, this is kind of cool. And I went to work after graduating from the Catholic Free Press. Owen Murphy was the editor. He was a St. Mike's grad. And I continued to write for the Middletown Press in sports. And then I went to Foster's Daily Democrat in Dover, New Hampshire. I decided I wanted to be a sports writer. I wanted to get away from news, and I was going to I was going to write sports, and I was going to be a columnist, and I had my ideas of everybody at the time because it was the best sports section in the country. I read for the Boston Globe, and I read the Boston Globe, and I read their columnist, and that's what I wanted to do. And then I went to the Middletown Press in Middletown, Connecticut, where I still live, to write and cover the Hartford Whalers. And I walked into, it was owned by the Dench family, and I took the elevator up to the second floor, and the elevator opened, and I was looking at this largest standing black and white photography collection, private collection outside of a museum in the United States. And I said, I'm not for this next book. And I wrote there until I wrote there from '88 until '95, and from '94 to '95, they had a new sports editor. They were cutting back on coverage. I wasn't covering the Whalers. I became a police reporter, and I covered cops, and it was a pretty heady time. We had Latin Kings and Los Solitos that were shooting it out in Middletown over crack trade at the time, so I was riding with undercover units and doing that kind of thing. Got laid off from there. This was the economic downturn and the downturn in newspapers. Wrote for the Hartford Courant as a correspondent for a year and a half. Couldn't get full-time, went to the Record Journal in Meriden and had enough and burned out. And at that point, what do you do? And my answer was, you go mow grass in Florida on a golf course. And I'd never done that. And I didn't know what to do, and I was really, I don't know if the word was despondent, but it was close to that, because I really had no idea. And Ricky Kudamash, who's this kid, called me up and said, well, why don't you come to Florida, live in my condo, because I just moved in with my girlfriend, who's now his wife. Live in my condo, and my brother, who's general manager for golf course, will get you a job down there. And I thought that was it. I thought that was the end of writing. And I worked down there for 8 months, and I moved back to Connecticut, and I worked at 3 golf courses, and I really thought that was it. I was done with writing. I was getting to like golf. I'd be liking working on golf courses. I had been golfing steadily since I was 19. I first played when I was 6 or 8 years old, knocking a ball around my Uncle Papa and Aunt Josie's yard with an 8-iron and a tree, and I would hit the balls to the tree. One window in all that time. I hit the house a bunch of times, but I only took out one window. And I really thought that was it. And I remember standing, it was a September, October, and I remember standing on the golf course, Hartford Golf Club, and thinking to myself, one day I need to get to the old course in St. Andrews, because that's the home of golf and I need to see it. 2 months later, I bumped into Brad Klein, who was the architecture editor for Golf Week up until about 2 months ago. And there was a new magazine out called Superintendent News, which was one of the first magazines that covered the golf course maintenance industry. I wrote a piece for them about cutting cups, putting the flags in the green. He liked it. He had me write 2 more pieces. 2 months later, I was hired full-time. And that June, not only was I at the old course, but I was at the old course for 2 weeks, mowing grass for the British Open. And that's the first time I was ever, and at that point, I realized you can't, people say, where do you see yourself in 5 years? If I had ever said that, you would have thought I was on drugs. 2 years before, I'm standing on a golf course, I'm raking a bunker in West Hartford, Connecticut, and literally 5 months later, I'm in St. Andrews, Scotland, talking to the head greenkeeper of the old course for what I think is the premier golf event in the world. And I did that for a while, and it was a really screwy publication. The guy they brought in to be the editor didn't understand the business. He didn't understand golf business, so he didn't know how we should cover it. And the fact that I had real on-course experience, I think, rubbed him the wrong way. And I ended up, and I remember explaining this to a golf course superintendent. I said, writing is a really strange thing, writing for an editor. If I mow a green for you, and you're a golf course superintendent, and you say to me you did a bad job, we can go out to the green and look. And if my lines are straight, and I haven't missed anything, then I did a good job. If I missed, then I did a bad job. With writing, I can get all my lines right, and you can still tell me I did a bad job. The problem is then you don't know what a good job is, because there is no good job. And I got fired from that magazine because of that guy. He fired 2 of the 4 people on the staff, a 3rd quit. He was demoted within 6 months and fired, and within 2 years the magazine closed. So it was a really weird time, because I was traveling the world, literally from Mexico to Northern Ireland and Scotland and the Caribbean, and then within a year and a half I was out of that magazine. And since then, I've been freelancing for a variety of what would have been the competition for that magazine. And Margaret said, I'm freelancing for Superintendent magazine, which is not true because in February, with no notice, they closed the magazine. A $4 billion company decided it didn't want to have 6 magazines anymore, and so it tried to sell them, and the 2 they couldn't sell, they closed down. So I'm now working for a new platform where I'm a podcast host 3 times a month for something called the Renovation Report, where I talk to superintendents, architects, and builders about renovating and restoring golf courses, which I love, but I need to write because that's really what I do. And that kind of gets into, so how do you go from that stuff to get to this? And I remember when I was covering the Hartford Whalers, and it looked like I was carving out a niche as an NHL writer, a beat writer, a columnist, a pro sports writer. People would say, do you want to write a book? And I remember I would always say no. I don't want to be concerned with a big project. I really want to be concerned about the next thing I have to write. I want to be the best writer I can be. But when I was writing for Superintendent News, it kind of occurred to me that I did want to write a book because I wanted to make a place for myself in the golf industry. I wanted to write a book that kind of touched on something nobody else had. And it was really strange. I want to get a copy of it, but the first book I wrote was called To the Nines, because I grew up in Massachusetts and I thought everybody played 9-hole golf courses. Because the first golf course I was ever on was Cohasset Country Club, when my grandmother, who didn't know where to do with my brother and I, took us golfing when we were 4 or 5. The first time I ever played real golf was at Woodstock Golf Course, and the first place that I played golf all the time was Hemlock. Those are 3 9-hole golf courses. I thought the rest of the country had 9-hole golf courses. Unbeknownst to me, it didn't. It turns out that 8 states have more 9-hole golf courses than 18. 7 of them are west of the Mississippi. The only one that doesn't is Maine. But I started to look around at the idea of writing this, and it came up with the idea of telling stories about 9-hole golf courses. And so the first book was all the courses in it have it's not about the golf course unless it's one of the premier layouts. So I touched on Fenwick and Old Saybrook, where Katharine Hepburn learned to play and played all the time and took Howard Hughes golfing. I did Sewanee where it's on the campus of the University of the South, and an Episcopal bishop helped design the golf course. And I'm pretty sure that's the only bishop that has that, anywhere that has that on his resume. And so the book did very well, and as it turned out, it was the first book in the history of golf literature ever to be written solely in 9-hole golf courses. So I made kind of a name for myself accidentally. It spawned another book by a guy named Ivan Morris that wrote about every single 9-hole golf course in Ireland, and a travel guide in Scotland of what 9-hole golf courses there are and what to play. And what it did is it became a business card, which a friend of mine told me this, and I didn't believe him, that you can't write a book until you write a book. It didn't matter that I'd been writing for newspapers for 20 years and written somewhere along the line of 2,000 articles or columns. People didn't believe I could write a book until I wrote a book. Once I wrote the book, then I could write a book. So the next book was a book called Haunted Golf, which I wrote, we were approached by a publisher who said, we have a series of haunted stories. We have haunted highways, haunted hotels, haunted love stories. We'd like you to write some about golf. And I said, okay. And so I went out and I found some stories, that sort of golf stories that revolved around golf courses, and found courses that had golf stories and all that. And here's another strange. When you write a book, they asked for a sample chapter, and so I sent in 2 sample chapters, and they loved them. And then I came back and they said, okay, next we want you to send, this is all done with a contract. Now we want 6 sample chapters beyond the 2, so it'll be 8 chapters. So I sent in the 6 sample chapters, and they said, no, this isn't going to work. And you have 2 choices. We're going to assign you another writer to work with you, or you can find your own. And at that point, I'm stunned because we had just gone through the 2 chapters and they had seen this book. I don't think my writing style changed. And I went to a friend who I wanted to do it, and we would be great, and he couldn't do it, and he asked one of his friends to do it. Mentioned it to me. And he lives on the Cape, and his name is Chris Gonsalves, and we did a great job. He rewrote my stuff, the book came out. He ended up writing another haunted book for them without me. We won't bring that up, I'm not bitter about it at all. No, and he did it, and it was great. And so that comes out, and then what happens is, I get contacted by a club,
the Minikahda Club in Minneapolis wants the club history. And I love writing about history, and I love the history of golf courses. And this is something that I found as I was going. I didn't know this. I didn't know that I would like delving into the architectural history and how courses were formed. And I ended up writing this book for this course, and now, once you write that, now you're a history book writer. So now you have one of those. And so then I go on and write the To the Nines comes out. This is actually the second edition. This came out in 2015. The original was in print 2006 to 2010. And then I got, in 2015, I got hired to write the club history for the Shoreacres Club in Lake Bluff, Illinois, which is kind of the Greenwich, Connecticut of the Chicago area. A lot of big old money, kind of, it's where golf started. That town is where golf started, west, in what they used to call the West. In 1899, the West was Chicago. So all the references in books then to the West were. And even though there was golf in California, it didn't count because people in California weren't playing in events in the East because it took too long. It was a 6-week round trip for them to come out and play in one event. So nobody from California was coming out to play golf. And they were scheduling the events in the East around travel times for the people from the West, Minneapolis and Chicago, to get out. And there's stories from them of people not playing because it was taking them too long. It was taking them a month to come out, play, and go back. So I did that, and then I wrote Shoreacres, and then last year I got one of the dumbest questions somebody ever asked me in my life. And they said, "Do you want to write a book on the 25 best 9-hole golf courses in the United States, in North America?" And I wanted to say, "What do you think my answer was going to be?" And I wrote back, "Yes. How much are you going to pay me?" And they said, they gave me a number, and I said, I doubled it because I'm a savvy businessman. And they immediately responded, "Yes," which means I'm not a savvy businessman. I should have tripled it. And that's how this book came about, and it's really fantastic. It was released in February, on February 6th, and by the second week of April this year, the first printing was sold out. Which I think there was 30 books in the printing. So I actually think there was about 1,000. You got one, so thank you for that. And it came out, and it's done very well. I did 5 minutes on the Golf Channel on the morning drive, which was really fun doing national television. Makeup was fantastic. Apparently, I'm a natural with a blend of C5. That's what the makeup ladies told me. So I don't know what that means, but if you're looking to buy me something for Christmas, I think that might be. And so the book came out, and they did a fantastic job on it. And the publisher was big time in the sense of they put a lot of money into the book. As you can see, it's a little different than this. And so I'm not knocking the book. It's fantastic. Soft cover, black and white, hardcover, glossy pages, nice writing, really good editing, fantastic photos. And that's how the book came out. And so that's the new book. And what this really chases back to, though, is funny, is because it's in there, is Cohasset. It's where I learned to first be on a golf course, and it's where I learned to like golf. And I don't know if this is true. My brother's not athletic. My parents like golf, but they don't see it the way I do. I actually fell in love with golf course architecture. I see architecture the way other people see paintings, and nobody taught me that in the beginning. I read a ton since then. But I remember standing on the first hole of Cohasset and thinking, wow, there's 3 ways to play that hole, depending on how far you hit it. And I didn't have any friends who understood that. I just thought it was really cool. You could hit a ball up on the hill that would run down, while that guy could go that way around and run it on, or somebody could fly it in. And it turns out that that was golf course architecture, which I didn't understand. And there are other people. My friend Brian Silva, who's a very famous architect, he said, "You got to remember this big guy. 1,000th of 1% of us really care about that stuff. So when you ramble about it and people get really glossy-eyed and they look like they're going to doze off, it's because they don't care and you can't blame them. But I do care about that stuff. So I go into the woods and look for golf courses that haven't existed since 1941. For some reason, that seems like a lot of fun to me and something I should be doing. And I write about architecture, and I write about good architecture and bad architecture, and spend hours digging through digitized magazine articles and newspaper articles, finding these tales of golf courses being designed and built and going fallow and being recovered and who did what, and all for, there's 800 people in the United States who care about it. I'm one of those people, so it's a lot of fun. And I've carved out a little bit of a niche as someone who's knowledgeable on Seth Rayner, who is an architect, and I see you all glossing over, and I'll move on in a second. But it's, and that's helped too, and so I do some stuff with that. And so now it's Cohasset's 100th anniversary. I ranked them as the 8th best in North America, and I didn't give them an advantage because I know the golf course is my hometown. It's a fantastic golf course, and as people in my business know, clubs have a tendency to not understand how good they have it, especially what's called golden age architecture, which is 1910 to 1939. When Cohasset was built and it opened, it stood among the pinnacle of golf courses in Massachusetts. It was charging a guest fee on weekends the same as the country club in Boston. They were charging $3 and $4 while others were charging $2. They had caddies, they had tennis. As I discovered online, and I just sent to the club, it's on their website, the Olmsted brothers, landscape architects, who were the most prominent in the country, who had done everything from Central Park to Fisher's Island and the Boston Greenway, were hired by Cohasset. And there's a planting plan for, 2 planting plans for Cohasset, right down to how many of X kind of bushes and where they were going to be and how the driveway was going to be lined. They had 250 members. They had hired Donald Ross, who was the preeminent architect in New England at the time, and probably, so 1919, he's top 4 or 5 in the country at the time. He's still, some people still consider him the greatest architect. And he comes to Southbridge, and we know that he was here. We know that he was on site, so this wasn't just sending one of his guys. He wasn't just looking at topography maps. He was laying out this golf course. And he created a wonderful, wonderful design. The greens are more placid than Donald Ross members or Donald Ross fans are used to, but you have to remember that even then, the architects built for what the owners wanted. And the 3 Wells brothers, who were golfers, were probably familiar with his work. I believe I have one of the Wellses playing in an event in Pinehurst, where Donald Ross had designed probably 4 courses by that point, including Pinehurst #2. They had seen his work, they knew who he was. The course gets changed twice probably in the first 10 years, and the changes are made by Walter Hatch, who is one of Donald Ross's chief construction engineers. So the guy that was coming here wouldn't have been doing anything without Donald Ross knowing what he was doing. So the addition of bunkers and the addition of bunkers and the moving of tees and expansion of tees and greens was all done with Donald Ross knowing. So this is kind of a redesign of a Ross being redesigned or updated by Donald Ross, which is fascinating. And at the time, with American Optical being such a prominent company, the Wellses were very well known. The golf course would have garnered a lot of attention. The #1 golf course in the book is Whitensville, and Whitensville mimics everything about Cohasset. It's the Whitten family in Whitensville who own Whitten Machine. They build a 9-hole golf course for their employees. It's private, but it's affordable. They hired Donald Ross, and the only thing they did is they did it better. It's a better golf course, and I think they wanted a better golf course. There's more bunkering, there's more boldness to it. I think they want it to be better than, I wouldn't be surprised if they were looking at Cohasset. It was built in, I think 27 or 28, so it's 8 years later. And I really think they looked at this and said, wow, this is a success. Look what the Wellses essentially gave the course to its members and let them buy the land over time from them, and they created Cohasset Country Club. The work began in 1916. The first 6 holes opened in 1918 on July 4th weekend. And I believe those 6 holes would have been everything on this side of Eastford Road, with 5, 6, and 7 being the 3. They would have built in order. They would have built in order. They would have built consecutively, so they were moving equipment around it. So they opened it, and then, and unbeknownst to the members, at that opening, the Wellses essentially gave the course to its members. But I think Whitensville, because Whitensville is the same thing. It wasn't an exclusive country club or a high-end country club. It was golf, and that was it. And we were going to let our members, we were going to let our workers enjoy this golf course. We were going to let the community enjoy the golf course, make it affordable. And so Cohasset kind of lost its way a little bit over the years, and they made some changes. And I remember there used to be rhododendrons in play and all that kind of stuff. But there's been a resurgence in the last, since 2000, a resurgence of this appreciation of Golden Age architecture. And Cohasset's done some really good things, and they've cut down some trees, and they've restored the whole quarters to the way they used to be. And they were smart enough to hire me to write for free for them, to write the history of the club on the Cohasset website. So we did that, and it's their 100th anniversary, and it's really fantastic. And I hope that the book helps them with the golf course and increase its membership and prosperity and all that. So I'm excited to be part of it. I'm excited. It's their 100th anniversary. I'm excited to be back in this library. I haven't been here since 1981. Went down to see the Anthony Pioppi room. I haven't seen that, well, probably since 1980s, but it was cool. And so that's how we got to this and how I'm here now. And I don't know what my next book's going to be, but I only have 2 or 3 rolling around in my head. And so I just need somebody to pay me to write it. So I'll do that. Anybody wants to pay me to write a book, I'll write it for. So that's how we got to this book, in case I was 30 minutes. 30 minutes of how we got to this book. And so if you have any questions, if I missed anything and you would like to ask me anything, except you, what would you like?
What about the golf course you were trying to restore out in Middletown a few years back?
Oh, I was actually trying to build one. Yeah. It was great. I had a 9-hole golf course. I had an architect design it for free. I had the money guy all lined up. We were building it on city land. We had a really, we had a lease that worked for both of us, and I had 2 money guys decide to do other things with their money. And they had all the plans, and they were going to do all these great things, and when they decided they don't want to spend their money on you, there's really not much you can do to change their mind. So anybody has, so then it was 1.9 million, so it's probably 2.4 now. So if anybody has 2.4 million and wants to get into a 9-hole golf course, I take checks. So that was that. It was great. It's a crime. I'd walk the golf course sometime, walk the site, and it really bothers me because it's actually, I walked with a construction, owner of a golf course construction company, and one of the holes is actually in the land. Like you can play, if you mowed it, you could play it right now. 2 alternate routes, all that kind of stuff, and it's really tough, but I thought I had a golf course, but we'll keep trying.
It's like Hemlock's 9 holes.
Hemlock's 9. I tell the story about Hemlock. Hemlock has one of the greatest golf stories ever. The people who owned it didn't like the kids who played there. Even though we spent money and hit golf balls in the woods and bought new golf balls, and I was playing the last par 3 one day, and I hit a shot onto the green about 20 feet from the pin, and one of the guys drove up in his cart and changed the flag while my golf ball was on the green. Wow. And when I got to the green, I was 12 feet from the pin. And he never said a word to me. He took a swig from his beer and he drove to the next hole. But they hated us. I remember that. They hated us. And sometimes they wouldn't let us play. I never understood that. I was respectful of the golf course.
No, I was talking about the other 9 that they had.
Oh, they've talked about that for years, haven't they?
I know. You can go there and play that course too.
Yeah. I'll rescue their 9.
Yeah.
You can still see it from the area. The back 9 if you see a Google Earth. But, so that's my story. And I owe it all to my class of 81 friends who are sitting out front. They propelled me to these heights through various means. Threats, cajoling. I just thought I had to get this done. So that's it. If you have any questions, please. I will just.
Tell us one of your haunted golf course stories.
Oh, this is a good one. There used to be a 9-hole golf course in I'm just saying it was in Canton, Connecticut, on the Avon line, and a family had built the Lowell family had built this golf course, and the clubhouse was also their home. So the downstairs with a massive fireplace was the clubhouse. They lived on the 2nd floor in this old farmhouse, and the 3rd floor was an attic. And they moved in, this is probably in the 50s, and they started to hear noises upstairs, and they started to hear the dragging of a foot, what they thought were a wooden leg,
And they had this very brave dog that one day wandered up the stairs and came running down the stairs, followed by cold wind, and hid underneath the television. And they had doors slamming and all that. And I know Walter Lowe and his wife very well, and their daughter Heather, who was the last superintendent at the golf course before it closed. And Walter's this big burly guy, and he gets really angry. And he got angry at the ghost, and he stormed up the stairs. And he said to him, "I don't care if you're here, but we're not leaving." He stormed back down the stairs, and they never heard the ghost again. And I sat in his house when he told me that story. Now, if that's true or not, I don't know, but I believe Walter when he told me, and the whole time his wife was nodding her head. So there's a lot of stories like that around that kind of stuff. So it's pretty interesting. That was one of my favorite ones.
Are there a lot of 9-holers in Ireland and Scotland?
There's more than you realize, because when people go to play, you go to play the famous courses and you go to play 18 holes. In 2013, I caddied on the Kintyre Peninsula, which is farthest southwest Scotland you can get. From the tip of the peninsula, which is called the South End, you can see Northern Ireland. And there's a fantastic 9-hole golf course there that nobody's ever heard of, called Kerrigan. And you just got to kind of work your way around. The locals will tell you, but there's no way you would ever know when you drive there, because you're driving past Carradale to get to Machrihanish, to get to Machrihanish Dunes, and even this par 65 golf course called Dunaverty. Why would you go to Carradale? But when you go there, you're stunned. It's in a town of 300. That's a 25 or 30-minute drive from the next biggest town, well, the biggest town on the Kintyre Peninsula, which is Campbelltown, 5,000 people. But it's astounding how good it is. And the same thing throughout Ireland and Wales and even England. But you have to park yourself in an area to want to play those golf courses, because you have to play Machrihanish and Machrihanish Dunes and Dunaverty before you get, to Kerrigan. And if you only have 4 days, you're not playing Kerrigan. I mean, you could go round and round on Machrihanish or Machrihanish Dunes and be perfectly happy. I'd play either one of those courses for the rest of my life. So. But it's great. If you have time to spend, you can find it. And they love their golf over there. I mean, they really love their golf. And the reason, it was small town is the reason there's 9-hole golf courses in small towns here in the West and the upper Midwest and all that, is that there wasn't much of a population, so there wasn't going to be an 18-hole golf course. It was going to be 9, and that was good enough for them. And it was recreation, and they played. In Maine, one of my friends who's since passed away is a historian, is convinced that the 9, we call them village courses, money was coming to the Maine coast in the summertime. But you didn't need 18, because you were playing tennis and you were boating and you were walking on the beach and you were swimming and fishing. So you had 9 holes. You just had 9. You didn't need to do the rest. But you go up the coast of Maine, and there's a succession of 9-hole golf courses that's fantastic. There's 5. Bob LeBance, who actually wrote the chapter, who passed away, writes about, in To the Nines, writes about 5 9-hole golf courses in Maine that just, you'd be happy to play them any day of the week. But they're Maine, so nobody's going there. Unless you go on a vacation, you're not going to go on a golf trip. Most people aren't going to go on a golf trip to play 9-hole golf courses. So.
What's your name, Pat?
7 Point. You want to play for some money? No, okay.
I drive the beer cart.
Okay.
I do that really well.
That takes talent. I need those people.
How often do you play?
Not as much as I would like, because I caddy on weekends. So if I play 20 rounds a year, I'm lucky.
What do you caddy for?
I caddy at Hartford Golf Club in West Hartford, and I also caddy for a very good amateur player, a young kid that I'm friends with. And so I'll do the Connecticut Open, Mass Am, that kind of stuff with them.
So what's the rate going for caddies in Hartford?
For you? So I double bag, which means I carry 2 bags for 18 holes, and I get about $70 a bag, which is cheap. It's $100 in Fairfield County. $100 a bag, and if I caddy for somebody private, I'm probably $100 for the event, plus all my expenses.
I still carry my own bag.
Okay. You don't need me. I did caddy for a girl last year who just about to graduate her junior year in high school, and she's going full ride to Florida. The straightest hitter I've ever seen. She's 5'2", about 86 pounds, and she just rips the golf ball. She was just a blast. She hit a shot in the bunker. It was a really bad shot. She looked at me like,
We walked to the next one, so it's fine with me. So it's fun. Yeah, her name is Maisie Filler. She could be the real, she'll be a top amateur at one point, maybe she plays pro, I don't know, but she's the real deal. She was great. Other questions? You want to buy some books? Do you have questions for me? Come on. You? What about your dad? No? No, you want it on the record, right? So it can be another piece for the... Your reporter types are all the same. Well, thank you for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I hope I entertained you for 45 minutes. Everything I said was the truth, I believe. No, it was? I think so.
So let's buy some books.
Yeah. If you look bored, I was going to make stuff up, but... Right.
Well, thank you.
Oh, this is for the fly. Yeah, this is the fly t-shirt. I can't believe I was this fit me my senior year.
Yeah, you were a little on.
I was 5'11", 135. I'm 6 feet. You the same?
I'm 69.
What do you know?
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
You're going over to the
I'm gonna
table
go sign books.
selling books, and if you haven't had a beverage or a cookie, please help yourselves. And thank you all for coming.